Hi, welcome back to the Gabster channel. Today is an exciting one. We're going to talk about and build an ultra capacitor power supply. We're going to use those massive ultra capacitors to build a power supply. I'm going to show you step by step how I do it. A very big disclaimer, these are very, very dangerous. They pack a huge amount of power, hundreds of amps, and they can discharge that very, very quickly. So big explosions could happen, melting, they can kill you. They're bad things. So make sure you do your own research before you play or work with these and know exactly what you're into and how to work with them. Do not take this video as a tutorial. Disclaimer aside, I'm going to show you how I put together ultra capacitor into a small power supply. If you guys recall, you remember I put together my DAC. I actually used 10 of those to supply the power supply for my DAC, the D11. This is going to be a smaller project. Mind you, they don't look very small, but we're going to supply a preamplifier that's going to be used for my DAC, and it's going to need plus and minus 5 volts. So because these all can use 3 volt each, we're going to put a couple of them in series, so that will be the plus 5 and the minus 5. And I'm going to show you how to put them together into a nice, really beautiful, organized, professional way, and at least how I do it. And these are really huge. These are 3,000 farad each. We're not talking microfarads, these are farads, 3,000 farads. In series, you're looking about 1,500 farads here. And that's a very respectable amount of energy. And they're rated at 3 volts. They also come in 2.7 volts. I like the 3 volts better. They give you a little bit more safety margin. I'm going to show you the parts that I have here to put these things together. All right, so what do I have here? I have 4 of these ultra capacitors. You can get those anywhere from Amazon, I'll put a link there, or eBay, or Mauser, or DigiKey. And they have very big in price, and the ones from Amazon are usually not 100% sure if they're really Maxwell. They could be in knockoff, I'm not 100% sure, but definitely a lot cheaper. Probably average like $60 each, versus DigiKey has a couple that I've used in my DAC that's roughly around probably I would say $80 each. I'm talking US dollars here. And these are from Mauser, also they have them at DigiKey. These are the Eaton one, probably the best of the quality of the bunch. And they are about close to $100. Mind you, I have not seen a huge differences between all of them, but it's hard to tell because I'm not an ultra capacitor expert. So we're going to need 4 of those because we're going to do a plus 5 and a minus 5. We're going to need to supply to charge those. So we're going to need a big transformer. This is a medical grade transformer that I picked up from Mauser. It's got a plus 2 rails of 12 volts, and they're 2 separate rails. Very important to note that. And we're going to use, these are going to be balancing boards. Because we are using 5 volts and these are 3 volts each, we want to make sure that one or the other doesn't end up with more than 3 volts and end up making a little meltdown or explosion or fire. So we want to put a balancing board, and that's going to basically prevent or mitigate that possible problem. So we need 1 for each pair. And then we're going to need to charge these, and then so I'm using the boards by Ian Canada. He made some beautiful boards to supply power to these, and they are configurable to different voltages from 5 volts, 15 volts, and also 3.3 volts. I'll put a link about Ian Canada's stuff. He makes some really high quality boards, and I do trust the boards that he produces. They are of good quality, and they work pretty well. And they are designed for the DIYer and the audiophile in mind. We're also going to need some shrink wrap. You're going to need threaded nuts. They are M12 in case you're wondering, and just save you on searching because it took me a while to figure out what kind of nuts they are using. So on one side you're going to need this. On the other side you're going to need to have a plate. Now you could buy plates either from copper to aluminum to different materials, and they cost quite a bit of money and they're extremely hard to find. Or you could make one. You get to the hardware store, get a small piece of flat aluminum, put a couple holes in it, and that's going to go on the other side right here. And if you use brass or copper, you'll reduce the impedance a little bit further. But again, to be honest with you, it's not huge. I would pay more attention to the wiring that's coming out of them because that's where the loss is going to be. And back to the shrink wrap. So I use a shrink wrap to wrap it around the nut and to basically isolate this part, because the biggest problem is going to happen is, let's say you have a metal box or something, and if this touches the metal, that's how they're going to short. That's how disaster might start. You can also shrink wrap the whole thing with some plastic. I've seen that. It is hard to find, but you can also do that. Another thing is you might want to invest in a case to put them in, and because you would want these to be like in a case, in a safe place at the end, instead of being tossed around and possible problems that might happen. So the beauty about the in Canada charging boards, they're actually called UcPure, and what's good about them is they will actually charge the capacitors within like 2 to 3 minutes, especially if you have a good strong power supply. So it takes like 3 minutes, say, to charge them, and then they could run for hours, depends on the load. But what happens is once they're charged, the charging, all the circuitry that charging the ultra capacitors is disconnected. So then these are running purely on the ultra capacitor without any link to the power supply or even the internal of the boards. So basically these become completely isolated, and that's how you're going to get the purest power. Okay, so we're going to start by making a little small hole here. Aluminum is easy. Distance between the two holes should be about 60 millimeters. And then you're going to use a bigger hole. So the drill you need is about, this is 31 to 64. It's actually almost half an inch. Or if you're in metric, it'll be about 12.5 millimeters roughly. And we're just going to cut it in here, and then we're going to polish it, and it's going to look just like the other one I just did earlier. And on the other side, you're going to put the bar in and put the two nuts. So that's, now we've got it all together. So the next thing is we're going to run a little wire from the mid-terminal here, and that's going to go anywhere basically on the bus bar. You will also need some zip ties. These are 14.5 inch long, and these are going to go around the to keep those together, and some tiny little zip ties, and these are, as long as they're narrow, to go into the little hole of the UcPure, and these are going to get tied into the top. And we also need some weather stripping adhesive on one side, and these are going to go underneath the boards, just to make sure we don't get any of these extrusions to puncture into the capacitor and cause a big short. You will also need some small wire to connect the center point of the balancing board to the other side. Another important thing you'll need is some very thick wire. I am using some pure silver wire. These are 12 gauge almost, and these are going to be connecting the ultra capacitor to the board. It's important to keep those as short as possible and make sure you get some very thick, high quality wire for that one. Okay, so next we're going to grab the charging board, the in Canada. This is a UcPure. It's Mark II, the one I'm using. Because it's got some sharp things that are coming out the other side, we want to make sure that when this goes on top, it doesn't puncture through the bottom. So we're going to get some weather stripping. You can get those at a hardware store. They come in different widths and sizes. Anything really, doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be very critical. So I'm just going to cut 2 pieces here. And we're going to stick those on this side. If you see something really sticking super long, there's no need to be this long. You can just snip those a little bit shorter. There you go. Now this is the default is 5 volt, and in here there is you can actually read through the manual. There is tells you about S2, S4, and S6. Basically, there's those little things here. This is S2, S4, and S6. Right now they have little resistors on them. It's default for 5 volt, but if you want 3.3 or 15, you'll have to follow the direction. You have to short a couple of them or not. Also, if you're doing 3.3 or 5 volts, 2 capacitors will do. If you are doing 15, you're going to need 6 of those. So that becomes a big honking thing. So be prepared for that. And so we put the, as I said, the little foamy here on one side. We're going to cut another one and put it on the other side. Okay, so that goes here, and that's going to go up here. Now you are going to grab, remember we talked about you needed some 14.5-inch zip ties. Make sure that it's longer than 14. 14 will not work. 14.3 it works, and 14.5 it did work. So what you're going to do is you're going to tie these together like that. And again, we can tighten it a little bit more after. That's one side, and we're going to do the other side. And the reason we're putting those zip ties is so we can hold the charging board on top. Also, you can put them a little bit out. Remember, the board's going to go in the middle here. So we got that. Then the board will come and it's going to sit right here. And you want the board to be on the outputs and inputs. You need to be by the balancing side. So where the balance, because that's where you're going to get the plus and the minus from here. Remember, this side is just a bus bar. These two are connected together. So for this to hold here, this is when you need those tiny little zip ties. They go in here and here. Okay, so the board is in place. You can see now you got something concrete to tie things up. We're going to tighten those a little bit more and take them out of the way. There we go. Okay, starting to look decent. So now we're going to do all the wiring. From the ultra capacitor to the input, which is here, we're going to use some very thick wire. I'm using here a pure silver wire. These are almost 12 gauge. And we're going to keep them short. They're going to go from the 2 terminals here to the input of the UcPure. And there is also going to be a small wire. This doesn't have to be thick. Just any little thickness will do. This is going to go from the bus bar portion here into the middle terminal right here, and this is going to ensure that the balancing board is working properly. So I'm going to strip a little bit of wire of this thing, So I stripped quite a bit of wire here, and the reason why is remember we didn't tighten these yet a lot, so we're gonna put this wire is gonna go in here. Oops. And this is going to go all the way to the other side. There we go. And that comes right from the other side. And we are going to put it right, we're going to solder it right on the middle pin right in here. All right, so this is where we're going to do a little bit of soldering. So we're just going to solder a little bit of solder on that little mid section here. Put a little bit more than what you think you need. We're gonna add the wire to it. Okay, so that's in here. I'm using my soldering iron that, I don't know if I mentioned it before, it's the IOU. It has a built-in suction. So it has a little suction here, so the fumes go in. I'll just demonstrate that. So when I put some solder, see how the fumes get sucked right. So the shortest path, remember trying to keep those wires as short as possible, is to go from the back actually, go through those two pins, and then you'll be able to access the positive pad here. And we're going to solder that right in here. It's a tough solder because of the heat. And also the nut is pretty close. One way around it is to actually, what you want to do is strip some more. So we're going to strip, these are little secrets that you might want to get. Then we can actually solder it right here, and we'll be able to turn this nut freely after. So that's one good way to do it. You can loosen the nut here. That's going to reduce the amount of heat transfer, so it'll be easier to solder. You don't have to heat up the entire thing here. But you have to make sure you don't encroach on the nut part. Oh, we got to turn our vacuum on. Actually, that's why we got all this smoke. Here you go. See, now you have the vacuum on, you don't get any smoke. It's pretty, I really love this thing. It's really good for your health anyway. So we're gonna soak that thing in. We're gonna put this thing down here, and there you go. And voila, so we got a beautiful, nice, clean solder joint here. And I'm going to do the same for the other one. Now the other one will come basically from it's going to go the opposite way. It's going to come from here, basically from here, and then it's going to go to here. So here we go. So now we've got basically, it says this unit is ready. And I've already made the second one as well. So we've got both here going. The beauty about these UcPure board by in Canada is that they can take either DC if you have like a laptop, or you can use AC. I prefer to use AC because it's got its own linear regulator here. There's no need to introduce a switching power supply into the board. I know they disconnect, but there are moments when they're not. And I really want to make sure that none of the ripple that comes with the those cheap switching power supply that end up leaking through the system. So I use the transformer with separate coils for each board. So we're going to have 12 volt here and 12 volt there, and that's going to go in here. Okay, next we need to protect the prongs from accidental shorting, because if they're exposed like this, there's a chance if they touch something or you could actually short them and disaster will happen. So what you want to do is cover those screws, especially because they're quite big and they're protruding. You still need some electric tape because these are very slippery. So what you want to do first is you put a little bit of electric tape on them. So I usually cut a little piece, and you just wrap the nut with it. So I'm gonna do that. Just a little bit stretching. There you go. And then you just do this. So this might be enough, but what I like to do is to grab a piece of shrink wrap, and also I like to make it look nice. So I do this. Just cut a piece of that, and so we'll put that right here. So you grab. Let me focus a bit more here. So you grab a little screwdriver. You put it in the middle like this on top. We're gonna use a heat gun. And we're going to shrink that thing. And that's done. As you can see, they will hold like that. So now if something touches, because really, if anything's going to touch, it's going to be those guys. Because, you know, from this angle, that angle, you're quite protected. So you want to cover those. So I'm going to do the other side, even though this is less critical. But still, I like to cover them all. So we're going to cover the other two as well. And here they are. They're all finished, as you can see. Look nicely, professionally put together. And this is where the fuse is. I strongly recommend you do not take the fuse out. It's really not that difficult to short something. Things happen, especially when you're doing DIY. You're putting things in and out 100 times. Something bound to happen. So this is going to be your safety fuse. I would strongly recommend you keep it there. So now that we've got all these done, we can ready to power them. As I said earlier, I will be using an AC signal. It's always good to test, especially at the beginning, to make sure that each ultracapacitor is not getting more than 3 volt onto it. So here you have it. We've got them all properly put together, and they're ready to go. So if you like this video, please consider subscribing, give it a like. Also, if you want to hear more about ultracapacitor, you might want to check out my DAC, where I've used actually 10 of those. I'll put a link up top here, and if you feel like subscribing, I'll put a little speaker symbol. You can click on that as well. So till then, we'll see you hopefully in the next video. Take care.